right here. What here? Let's just read them. Let's just read it. Nehemiah 8. So all the people gathered as one man in the square in front of the water gate, and they asked Ezra the scribe to bring the book. When you read the word book in your Bible, don't ever think this technology right here. What was the form of books? Scrolls, yeah. So this is a post, this technology is being innovated around the time of the early Jesus movement, and then became a widespread. We're talking about scrolls. So he brings the scroll of the Torah of Moses, which the Lord had given to Israel. Ezra the priest brought the Torah before the men and the women, over all who could listen with understanding. Even the kids are there. On the first day of the 7th month, he read from it before the square, which was in the front of the water gate, from the early morning until midday. It's like hours. He was reading the Torah in the presence of the men and women, those who could understand. Everybody was locked on. Just like what would happen at your church, I'm sure. Yeah, right. So Ezra the scribe stood at a wooden podium, the first pulpit, which they made for the purpose. And beside him was a whole bunch of Levites on his right, a bunch of Levites on his left. He opened up the scroll in the sight of the people. He was standing a bit higher. When he opened the scroll, everybody stood up. And he blessed the Lord, the great God, and all the people said, Amen, Amen, truth, truth. While lifting up their hands, they bowed low, they worshiped with their faces to the ground. And then after what exactly is happening is kind of hard to piece together, but it seems like Ezra does this reading, a section of reading, and then these Levites go out and explain the law to the people in their place. That's what he says. And so they read from the book, the scroll from the Torah, translating or breaking it down section by section to give the sense so that they understood the reading. So what seems to be is then also the first small group Bible study. So it's like Ezra does this reading, and it doesn't say that they're arranged in little smaller groups, but that seems to be the idea, because then it's all these Levites who, are in Ezra's cohort, and then they are helping explaining the section that they just read to this group of people in their place. You get the scene here? They just do it. They do this for 7 days in a row here in Nehemiah chapter 8. It's remarkable. Yes?
I think it's significant that he began to read on the Feast of Trumpets.
Yes. Yeah, the fact that this is all happening in the 7th month is the first day of the 7th month. Yes. Yeah, Rosh Hashanah. Right. Yes. And where? Yeah, that's right. Did I have anything about that in the notes? I don't think I did. No.
Leviticus 23.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in the modern Jewish calendar, they call these the days of wonder, the days of awe. It corresponds roughly to our October, because you have the Feast of Trumpets on the 1st, then on the 10th you have the Day of Atonement, and then just a week after that you have the 7-day Feast of Sukkot, of Tabernacles. And so just like the way that in American culture we have the holidays, which are Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's, this is like that. And so everything shuts down in Israel. It's really inconvenient, actually. If you're living, the grocery store is shut down, and you can't get leavened bread anywhere. Anyway, it's really complicated. So all the same, yes, this is very intentional. It's the 7th month. This is the month that they're going to retell the trumpet blast, which is connected to the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, and then the journey through the wilderness, which they retell in Tabernacles. Yes, absolutely significant. So here's the response of the people. Now, Nehemiah was the governor then, Ezra, the priest and the scribe, the Levites, they're teaching the people, saying, today is a holy day to the Lord your God. Don't mourn or weep. For the people, when they heard the scroll of the Torah, they just were weeping. They're weeping. Then he said to them, go, get some really fat animals and slaughter them and have a party. Drink of the sweet wine. Send gifts to those who have nothing prepared. This is a holy day for the Lord. Don't be grieved. And then this famous line. Did you know this is where it comes from? The joy of the Lord is your strength. Now this is interesting. Every English translation that I can find in Nehemiah 8:10 has the joy of the joy of the Lord is your strength. NIV, ESV, New American Standard, NRSV, King James. But I'll just show you. This isn't difficult to do. The joy of the Lord, that's not a difficult phrase, but this word strength right here, it's a very common Hebrew word. And I'm just going to show you the standard dictionary entry. It's ma'oz, and its standard meaning is refuge. This word occurs so many times in the Old Testament. And the only time it's translated strength is this time. If you look at every other occurrence of this Hebrew word in the Bible, it's translated refuge, protection, shelter, fortress. Now, let me just ask you, and I have this here in the notes, is the joy of the Lord is your refuge? Does that have a different feel to it than the joy of the Lord is your strength? Yes. So I love our modern English translations. They're such a gift. They're so incredible. But there are times where I don't understand why the committees have done what they've done. And this is unfortunately one of those times. And all I can think is it's kind of like the beginning of the Lord's Prayer, like hallowed be your name. What's hallowed? Who says hallowed anymore? Like just blessed. It means blessed. It's an English translation. Let's translate into normal English. Blessed, or excuse me, not blessed, made holy, recognized as holy, instead of hallowed. So this is another one of those. I don't know. Okay, so here's why I'm going into all this detail. The people hear the words of the Torah and they start crying. Why do you think they cry? Yeah, things aren't going well. Remember this scene? They're like really breaking the Torah, right? And lending with interest to each other. How did they end up in Babylon in the first place? That they're back here and it's also, how did all this happen? Through breaking the terms of the covenant. And then they hear the Torah, which has all the terms of the covenant in it. And what's their reasonable response? It's grief. Like, oh my gosh, we've done this to ourselves. So that's a natural response. But what's the response of Ezra and the Levites? Is they say, you guys, don't weep. Don't weep. This is a holy day to the Lord. The joy of the Lord is your protection. Which leads to the next question about this phrase. The joy of the Lord. Just like when Paul says the love of Christ compels us. Is he referring to his love for Christ? Or is he referring to Christ's love for him? And different commentators line up on different sides of that one. The joy of the Lord. Is this your joy in the Lord? Or is this the Lord's joy over you? How you doing? So yeah, exactly. Yeah, preaching terms. This is a gospel moment. This is hearing the Torah read aloud exposes their compromise and their failures, and so they weep. And in one sense, that's a reasonable response. But then in another sense, it's not a reasonable response, because what it shows is a lack of awareness of God's posture towards me when I fail. And God's posture towards his people is joy. So the classic, the classic one that your grandma loved to cross-stitch and put on her wall is Zephaniah 3:17, spoken to the people as they're about to go into exile. That the Lord your God is in your midst, a victorious warrior. He will exult over you with joy. He will be quiet with his love. He will rejoice over you with shouts of joy. So while God will bring justice, to be true to his character, his ultimate covenant purposes are to forgive and to rejoice over his people when they turn to him. I think it's exactly what's going on here. So man, this will preach like nothing else. But it involves a moment where you have to address a translation issue. And those are tricky, right? You have to be wise for how often you do that, because you don't want people to feel like they have to be whatever, Bible nerds. Well, you do want them to be Bible nerds, but you know what I'm saying. They don't have to know Hebrew to read their Bible. But at the same time, you do want to guide them to they're reading a translation. And sometimes those translations make choices, and sometimes you disagree with those choices. And so I think that's also good to put that on the radar of people in our church communities. But man, this is a really cool story that I think you kind of have to address. So they get out the Torah. They read from the words of the covenant. And yeah, that's well said. This is a gospel moment. The covenant exposes both their failure and God's joy in forgiving and creating a new future for his people. That's what they celebrate here. How you guys doing? Yeah, it's good stuff. Then they celebrate Sukkot. If you wanted, you could do a class or a teaching where you all bring palm branches and you build little huts. Or not, whatever you want, make them in the backyard. But this is very similar to this here, of rebuilding your identity through these rhythms, of worship rhythms. Sukkot was an act of worship, building these huts. It's very similar to eating the Passover meal. It's doing these tactile practices that retell the story of who we are as God's people. Another moment here is Nehemiah 9, this incredible prayer. Oh man, this prayer is exquisite. It's a long poem that goes from verse 5 all the way through. Look how long it is, you guys. It's really long. It goes all the way down to verse 37. And it's a little mini Old Testament theology. And it's all of the people, after they've soaked themselves in the Torah, the Levites get up and they lead the people in this corporate confession. And I think, in the notes I have some observations. It's all elaborately arranged in the symmetrical kind of ring structure. And at the very center of it is a petition for, let's just read it. Now, therefore, our God, the great, the mighty, the awesome God who keeps his covenant and loving kindness, don't let all of this hardship be insignificant before you. The hardship that's come upon us, upon our kings and princes, our priests, our prophets, our fathers, upon all our people from the days of Assyria to this day. That's it. We're back in the land, and it's lame. It's hard. It's not working. The Persians charge really high taxes. People aren't following the Torah. So look upon us. And then in these outer rings here, first they retell the whole story of Israel and say, those are our ancestors. And then on this side of the petition, they say, and we're pretty much just like our ancestors. So they fully identify with the sin of their ancestors. And then they end, look at how the prayer ends. Look at this. Behold, we are slaves today. We're slaves. Where are we back? So we're, in terms of the prayer, we're putting ourselves, nothing's really changed. Well, one thing has changed. What land are we sitting in? Well, we're not in Egypt. We're in the land that you gave to our fathers, but now we're slaves in the land. And all the abundant produce that you said would come when we obey the Torah, now we have to give it as taxes to the kings that you set over us because of our sins. They rule over our bodies, our cattle, as they please. We are in great distress. So what are we going to do? Everybody, let's pull up our bootstraps, and we're going to agree in writing. We're all going to follow the Torah from now on. Here's the list of everybody who signed the agreement. And then they give this short kind of summary. Here's all of the ways that we've been breaking the Torah, and here's what we're going to do about it. We're not going to marry non-Israelites anymore. We're going to start up paying the tithes again. We're going to support the Levites. We're going to celebrate the feasts. We're going to do it, everybody. We're going to do it. And you're like? Yeah, okay. So there's a movement here that's awesome about the reading of the Torah and their response. It might be worth exploring if there's a message or a teaching here about the nature of corporate confession, about the role that, whether this sounds high church or Catholic or whatever to you, I'm not sure, but it's biblical. There is some kind of value of taking time to own the sins that we ourselves may not have, committed, but that we participate in because we're a part of the family. Or we ourselves live in a situation where we benefit from the sinful decisions of others, or we live in the wake of the sins of our ancestors that still shape what the situation we're sitting in today. How you guys doing? I wonder if the Bible's relevant. Right? So there's a value to this kind of thing. It makes us aware that we're a part of a bigger story. It makes us aware that me and my own personal story and my own moral failures, they're very significant, but they aren't the center of the universe. Like also I'm a part of these systemic issues of sin that ruin everything around us. And we need to be just as aware of that as a community as my own personal moral accountability before God. That's what's going on here. This is good stuff. Okay. But in the interest of time, we're moving forward. Okay. Are you guys doing all right? I'm just rocking. Okay, all right. So there, in the notes, there's some cool things about the design of the prayer. Oh, yeah, just read the prayer. It's really beautiful, and it's really cool. So they make this agreement. The agreement that they make is to obey 7 specific laws of the Torah. And I've given you a lot of notes here, and the reason is these represent the same kind of thing that Ezra was doing with the Torah in Ezra chapter 9. So you have a lot of the laws in the Torah address Israel as a nation living in their own land with a temple government structure. And that's not their situation anymore. It's just a different political setting. It's a different social setting. And so each of these 7 laws are the result of Ezra or the Levites taking a law from the Torah and doing more of interpretation and then applying the principle of it or the spirit of it to their own circumstance. And it's not thrilling stuff. It's kind of like about how much wood gets supplied for the altar for the daily offering and stuff like that. Like, it's not thrilling. But it's what you see is it's people, once again, reading their Bibles and saying, there's wisdom here for how we obey God faithfully in our generation, even though the Torah doesn't address it specifically. It's that same process at work. And it's really interesting to read through. So I gave you a bunch of stuff there if you want to nerd out on that. Because I'm sure you woke up today wondering, how was the wood supplied to the right? Anyhow, what were the laws concerning tithes for the Levites? What was that exactly? So it's actually really interesting, I think. Okay, here's how the section ends. The happy section ends with a really, really happy part. Here's what Nehemiah does. His walls are finished. He finished the walls, they read the Torah, the temple's built, they're going to have the final party. And so here's what he does. This is great. At the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought out Levites from all their places. Everybody come, that they might celebrate the dedication with gladness, hymns of thanksgivings, cymbals, harps, lyres, all these ancient instruments, right, that you love to play. So what he does is he gets 2 choirs, and they start at the section of the wall opposite the temple, and he sends 1 choir of Levites marching and singing to march along the wall this direction, and then he sends another choir to go this direction, and then they're going to meet right at the wall section in front of the temple. Such a cool symbolism. They encircle the whole city with praise to the God of Israel. And then they finally meet up. The 2 choirs meet up in front of the temple. I took the officials with me. We blast some trumpets. We offer sacrifices. God's given everybody great joy, so that the joy of Jerusalem was heard from afar. And what's happening, this is the last phrase, I call it joy. The last phrase of this, that little line right there, corresponds verbatim to what happened at the party when they dedicated the temple here, and what happened when they dedicated the altar here. It says, God gave them great joy, and they played musical instruments, and they sang. God gave them great joy, they played music instruments, and they sang. God gave them great joy, and everybody around heard it, and they were full of joy. Joy, joy. Hooray, right? This is great. I knew this would work out, right? And just for a mental exercise, what if the book of Ezra and Nehemiah ended right there? What effect would that have on you, and what would you think is the message of this book?
How to construct a revival.
Yeah, sometimes it works out, you know? And it was hard, but we did it, didn't we? I mean, how else would you read it? We came across difficulty and opposition, compromise from within, problems from without, but we bound ourselves to the Torah, reminded ourselves of God's grace, and we had a party.
We're the hero.
What's that?
We're the hero.
Yeah, totally. I mean, in one way, that would be a more satisfying story to read, wouldn't it? It would be. So, I just want to let the effect of the book's conclusion, I just want to kind of read it together in light of everything we've done, and you'll just see how it works. It starts in 1244. On that day, men were also appointed over the chambers for the storerooms, where the contributions and the first fruits and the tithes, to gather them from the fields of the cities by the portions required by the law for the priests and Levites. So you may not have known this. Well, maybe you do. The temple, when Solomon's temple had all these storerooms dotting the exterior, and then the courts had all these storerooms. Like when you bring the produce of your fields, where do those go? Where do those get stored for the Levites to live off of them? So in these rooms. This is surely what Jesus is alluding to in John 14. In my Father's house are... Anyhow, just that one's for free. So it's all these storerooms, and so what they set them apart to be the rooms where all the new sacrificial system, all the Levites, everybody's gonna start tithing of their fields, so that all of the priests are well fed. It's gonna be awesome. They set it all up. The Levites are gonna perform worship for their God, for the service of purification, together with the singers, the gatekeepers, everything David and Solomon set up. Remember, everybody, hyperlink, In the days of David and Asaph, in ancient times, there were leaders and singers, songs of praise, hymns of thanksgiving. And so also, now in the days of Zerubbabel and Nehemiah, they gave portions for the, they have like these royal Levite choirs that just sing all day long in the temple. It's amazing. Now on that day, they read aloud from the scroll of Moses in the hearing of the people. And there was found written in it, hyperlink Deuteronomy 23, no Ammonite or Moabite should ever enter the assembly of God. Ammonites and Moabites have a common ancestral line from Lot. Do you remember that story? Right? It's the scandalous story. Alcohol, sex in a cave with your dad, not a good story. But that's what these nations are associated with in their origins. So, people from that family line were not ever supposed to enter the temple. Also because they didn't meet the sons of Israel with bread and water. These are the guys that hired Balaam. Remember that whole thing? But God turned that curse into a blessing. So they heard that law, and they excluded all non-Israelites from Israel. Oh. Okay. All foreigners from Israel, from Ammonites and Moabites. It's like two small people groups living on the east side of the Jordan River. And from that, they get no more non-Israelites. Huh. Now, prior to this, Eliashib the priest, who was appointed over the chambers of the house of God, he was related to Tobiah, the guy who was constantly harassing Nehemiah. In fact, Eliashib, you know what he did for Tobiah? Ooh, you remember Tobiah's ethnicity? Okay. So they read about no Ammonites, but what they excluded was all foreigners. And then there's one Ammonite that they didn't exclude. And who didn't exclude an Ammonite? A priest. And in fact, not only did they exclude all these other people, they didn't exclude one Ammonite, Tobiah. And why didn't they exclude? Well, actually, they had given him one of those really nice storerooms as a temple, as a little Airbnb for him when he would come to town. And so instead of putting in the incense and utensils and the tithes of grain into that little room, Eliashib prepared it as a little special room just for Tobiah the Ammonite. This is all happening under Nehemiah's nose. Now, listen, Nehemiah says, I wasn't in Jerusalem when this happened. It was the 32nd year of Artaxerxes. I had gone to the king to run an errand. I wasn't there. And so after some time, I asked leave from the king. And so I came back to Jerusalem, and I learned about what Eliashib had done, giving him one of the rooms in the temple courts. It was very displeasing to me. So I threw out all of Tobiah's goods out of the room. Then I gave an order, and they cleansed the room, and I returned the utensils to the house of God with the grain offerings and the frankincense. Okay. So, but think, now we're casting this glance here. So the temple rooms are to be sanctified and set apart for the use of the Lord. And how seriously are people taking the sanctity of the temple? Yeah, not so much. Not so much. And a priest, no less. Then I also I started looking around in more of the temple rooms, and I discovered, there's nothing here for the Levites to eat. And so the Levites actually, and the singers, who are supposed to be here performing their service, they actually had to go away and get jobs so that they can feed their families. And so I reprimanded the officials, and I said, why is the house of God forsaken? So I got them together, restored them to their posts. All Judah brought the tithe of grain, the wine, the oil, and the storehouses. And so In the charge of the storehouses, I put Shelemiah the priest, and Zadok the scribe, and Pedaiah, and the Levites. In addition to them was Hanan the son of Zakur, Mattaniah. At least I trusted them. It was their task to make everybody else follow the rule. Oh Lord, remember me for this.